Many of you guys know that since I first got on YouTube more than 10 years ago, I've consistently advocated for establishing independent educational institutions and communities as an alternative to engaging in mainstream politics or online culture wars. Basically, building schools and communities has always been my political position. The reasons for that are several. First of all, I don't have a lot of hope for the long run future of our civilization as it stands. I don't think our way of life is materially sustainable. I think resource availability will increasingly become an obstacle to industrial scale capitalism. I think demographic issues will play themselves out along current lines. It's always possible that immigration policy or some populist right-wing government sets things on a different course, but you shouldn't put all of your eggs in that basket since it's by no means guaranteed. I think migration patterns and demographic destiny is deeper than policy. It's deeper than what states control. There is a literature on the patterns of migration, historically speaking. In a certain way, Rome could not have prevented German migration into their frontiers. Where there's a wealth imbalance, you will have a movement of peoples seeking better opportunity. Not that it's completely useless to try to have border security, that sort of thing. I'm just saying it is kind of what it is. Our demographic destiny is kind of baked in the cake. There's also biological issues that we, even if there was no demographic change, have to deal with. Decreased testosterone levels and sperm counts, increasing problems with fertility in women as well, increased mutational load on average in the population. We are not the healthiest people, and nature's way of correcting for that is, sorting the wheat from the chaff. And so I expect that's what will happen. So there are a few reasons I think just long run, Western civilization as we know it is doomed, but all civilizations die eventually. So like with the decline of Rome, the only truly productive thing for us to do is to build monasteries, educational institutions, and independent communities that can preserve the cultural practices, intellectual traditions that have made our civilization what it is. If you care about that classical heritage, European cultural heritage, you should consider supporting some kind of conservationist effort in that regard. The mainstream institutions that are intended for that, conservatories, universities, are co-opted by people that don't have our best interest at heart, who are actively working to undermine classical aesthetics. I went to music school. I know that that's the case. So it's an important thing. It's not in the news cycle. It doesn't seem urgent because there's no current event to look to talk about and, direct all of our attention to these kind of hyped up issues. But it's long run what is most important, in my opinion. That's where my heart is. It is in building schools and communities. But it's not purely conservationist, because I think there is also an opportunity today with the scientific knowledge that we have to build a new kind of fundamental worldview. You need an integrated worldview, metaphysics, all the way down through ethics and politics, to have a beautiful civilization, I think. Beauty, in one respect, is an integration of all of the parts, mutual dependence and communication between all the parts of an organic whole. To have that, you need a unified worldview, and we obviously lack that. Our scientific knowledge, quote unquote, is divorced from our metaphysics and theology, and that's an aberration historically. In the medieval period, the Catholic worldview was just the scientific worldview at the same time. That was the case in Bronze Age societies. Sacerdotal authority blended with secular and scientific or proto-scientific authority. So there are developments in physics, people looking for theories of everything that are promising candidates for something like that foundational worldview integrating factor. I've talked about Chris Langan's CTMU. That's a candidate. Obviously, I have my own ideas in philosophy that I would bring to the table. I don't know that anyone has firmly established the worldview that is ultimately going to be the most sustainable, the most intuitively satisfying, the most consistent with empirical evidence, and ultimately the most truthful. I don't think we have it yet. And many independent researchers are hesitant to work with others, to share their work with others, to engage in public discourse, because sometimes pride, sometimes they're afraid of being made to look foolish. People really like their pet theories and they want to protect them from criticism instead of actually strengthening them through criticism. So the way you fix that is having the right kind of institution where cross-disciplinary, worldview building work can really happen. That is really probably the most important reason, I think, for building a school like I'm talking about. For people outside of academia, outside of our corrupted institutions, who are high IQ, who are philosophically inclined, who are looking for that holistic worldview at various levels, whether from the perspective of their own discipline or from that kind of highest level philosophical perspective. Having a place for people like that to congregate and engage in discourse where they can live cheaply while they're engaged in their studies, research, and discourse. And then at the same time, having the benefit for younger people of that kind of researcher class, the classical kind of faculty student body dichotomy. I think there's something to that. So if we had an institution where independent researchers could go and be subsidized or live cheaply, and then have a student body, 18 to 20-year-olds, before they waste all their money on college, go and get a firm classical grounding, get educated in the way that they won't get educated in university, and then maybe after that kind of preparation, go and spend a bunch of money on school to get your degree that'll get you employed. I think people would be much better off not going straight from high school where they have no experience of independence straight into a college environment where everything is let loose at once. I think it's a horrible model that has been propped up by media idealizations of the college experience, and it's really unhealthy. So I think the norm should be, when you graduate high school, not spending all of your money getting yourself $100,000 in debt, getting a degree that might not be all that useful, that you might not even care about in a few years. Instead, having independent institutions outside of the mainstream educational system where people can get that classical grounding, where they'd actually read Plato and Aristotle. No one has time to do that kind of study. Read the Greek plays. No one has time to do that study in university unless you are a classics major or something like that. Even philosophy majors don't actually read the great philosophers, ironically. They usually like read out of anthologies and little segments, and it's no way to have, a robust, well-grounded foundation going forward. So I think an institution like that would offer a lot in the modern day, because you can make content out of this kind of research. You can push the discourse forward above and beyond what goes on in your school itself. I think if you want to shape the direction of culture, even if a decline is inevitable, long run, if you want to put us on the right foundation, building a school is really just the only way of doing that effectively. That's what universities are supposed to be, but our universities aren't working for us. We need that kind of institution. I mean, that's why the left won in the 20th century. They controlled the schools. And so then all of the elites going to elite universities filtered with their kind of corrupted ideologies into all of the elite institutions throughout society, from the military, the media, law, and that's kind of how we got in our current predicament. Education is powerful. It's important. A lot of people don't like the idea of education when it comes to their politics, and they ignore it, like many conservatives have, because they weren't really, big fans of their education when they went through it, perhaps. So it's not like a fun idea. They'd rather go to a street protest. They'd rather, spend hundreds, thousands of dollars flying in a bunch of people to some place to go fight with Antifa or something, which is a huge waste of resources. Like any one of those ridiculous real life events that have been so disastrous for dissident circles, take all of the resources that went into transporting people around to do that. Instead, buy a big building somewhere where you can have this kind of school. And that's not a one-off event. That's a permanent institution where finally there's somewhere that alternative researchers and kids who want to get a better grounding for their education can go, put themselves on the right track, accelerate the discourse, and it seems like a much better use of resources. So, I think we have to build monasteries for conservationist reasons. If we want to find that coherent worldview that can act as a foundation of what comes next, then we need the right kind of discourse. We can't have echo chambers and independent researchers afraid to talk with one another. We need to incentivize researchers to go and participate in a more kind of public and open thing. The information that you exchange online in scheduled meetings or, lectures or that sort of thing is very limited. The majority of our communication is nonverbal, it's intuitive, and we shouldn't pretend that we even understand all of the ways that human beings communicate with one another. We evolved to communicate in person. So I think if you take a kind of Talebian approach to evolutionary systems, you don't want to put everything on theory. And when we communicate online, our thought is directed to explicit propositional knowledge and theory instead of practice, phronesis, intuitive, direct understanding, and facets of understanding that transcend our conscious apprehension. Online, in these partitioned, limited forms of communication, you can only say so much. You can only know to focus on so many things. Whereas in a common space where you're cohabitating that space for extended periods of time, conversations happen that you don't even understand the significance of until, all of a sudden in your research, it hits you that this idea that your friend had or that a student had or whatever is significant. I think that stories like that are obvious throughout intellectual history if you read about it. That's one of the benefits of the university system. But as I said, our universities are not working for us. They're also way too expensive. So that's been my goal, my plan for 10 years. And I've shaped my life. I've moved my family around the country trying to find the cheapest, best way to get this done. I have land now. It's not huge, but there is space. I don't have a building to run a school currently. I would like to have a school built. I don't care if it's on my land. If somebody with money bought a place and then said, hey, would you like to go participate in this school that I'm opening? I know you have some ideas. I would say, yeah, absolutely. And I would show up. You know, the thing is, no one's doing this. No one in dissident circles, you know, who cares about kind of preserving Western civilization, culture. No one's building these schools. And often when people do build schools, it's purely online and it's really overpriced. It's trying to direct money to a few entrepreneurs there, where what we really need is a place where like 18-year-olds can go live and learn under a schedule in a rigorous way for like $300, $400 a month, something that would not cost them extra compared to even living at home with their parents. You know, something so cheap, as widely available as possible to help young, especially young men, get a proper grounding in life. And then a place where independent researchers can go and live cheaply and maybe be subsidized by the student body or something like that, or by online contributions through media efforts that are done. It's just a very important thing, I think. So I wanted to say that. I've made the case for a school in many different forms. I've talked about kind of my long-run vision for how you could have a network of communities sharing a common distributed educational system that's as cross-disciplinary as possible, that's designed to arrive at this kind of integral worldview. I have a video explaining the peer academy model, but that is kind of, you know, down the path a few years when things are developed, you know, and it's not something that could happen immediately. So in the meantime, I have a capacity here to host some kind of educational institution. That's what I want to do. But yeah, obviously there are limitations with my circumstance. I have been doing the Plato groups. So I do a Plato dialogue reading group and the Mathematicoi group, where we read more like math and logic centered texts from mainly Neoplatonists. We're doing Aristotle starting tomorrow, actually. So you can sign up on the Patreon for those groups or message me on Skype. I do make exceptions for people to make it as widely available as possible. But obviously I am trying to build a school. I am trying to build capital to have that accomplished. It's slow moving and not a lot of people really want to support it, which is sad. I think it's a very important thing. I think it's more important than contemporary politics or donating money kind of absurdly to drama streamers and stuff like that. This is what you get when you have disaffected people expressing angst and resentment online, directed by media personalities, populists. You get grifting, you get wasted resources, you get the least common denominator having its voice expressed, and, you know, exceptional, you know, intelligent, thoughtful, controversial people being sidelined. That's just what you would expect given the IQ distribution. Not complaining about it, it just is what it is. But yeah, not a lot of people have really wanted to throw in to support building a school. I would support if someone else had a plan like this. The thing is, I literally don't know of anyone else in these circles who recognizes why this is necessary. It should be such a basic thing. You know, just kind of a priori, if you wanted to come up with a strategy for saving our people, whatever, then the first thing to do would be to, you know, get everybody who wants to think of a solution together in a common space and have a lot of discussions talking about pros and cons and have that discourse out. Even to do that is basically to have the school that I'm talking about. to have a physical space where a lot of people can work productively on solutions and have a lot of discourse. Obviously, it just has to be physical because that's the way to exchange information the fastest. And as I said before, there are ways that we communicate that we're not conscious of that need to be integral. You need to see the consequences in a person's actions, in their habits, of their ideas as well, not just the idea taken independently of the life that supports the idea. So, yeah. We are doing the Plato groups, and basically, like, Plato is so important for understanding the rest of Western philosophy, so important for understanding what our civilization is, where it comes from, and so few people have a good grounding in it, that just building like a straight up Platonic academy would be probably more productive than anything else I could feasibly do at the moment. So that's my current objective, is to build a school just dedicated to studying Platonism, Neoplatonism. Aristotle is included in that, in Platonism. Classical foundations, helping young kids get into the tradition and then take that with them going forward in whatever their individual course is. And then also having kind of higher level, more experienced, more knowledgeable people, hopefully participating, making content, making this knowledge more widely available for people. Because I think it does make a real difference. It's one of the few things where if you read the dialogues very often, it will like impact your character in the same way that reading the Bible will impact your character. Reading Hindu texts will impact your character. So I think it's a good in itself in a lot of ways, and that's what my aim is. That's what I'm trying to do. If you want to talk with me about those plans and why I think they're necessary, why I think they're a good idea, my Skype is almost always in the description under my videos. If you want to support me so that I'm able to put more time into doing this sort of thing and the content, you can support me on Patreon and also join the Plato groups that way. Or you could consider supporting on PayPal, a donation for the sake of building a school. It's just sad to me that no one has thought to do anything like this. I know there are education-based projects out there, but it needs to be as cheap as possible. It needs to be a real physical space. There just has to be a place where if you're an 18-year-old kid just graduated from high school and you've been red-pilled in various ways, it would be good to have this discipline, good to have this foundation, but there is literally nowhere to go. And that's tragic. There should be a place for young kids to go, over at the age of 18 for legal reasons, go and get prepared for whatever intellectual path they want to take. And Platonism offers that. It's really the only viable solution for that common ground, because it is the common metaphysical language that Western civilization has been built off of. And if you don't recognize that, then you just really don't know the literature. You don't know the tradition. So that's what I believe in. That's what I think is necessary. That's what I would like to support. If some people may be curious about my particular philosophy of education, the Peer Academy model I've talked about as that kind of long-term institutional structure. But as far as how to teach, a lot of it comes down to integrating the things that Plato talks about, integrating music and gymnastics, because it's a holistic process. And especially with younger kids, physical activity and music is more accelerative for development than strictly book learning. So you incorporate wrestling, incorporate learning musical instruments, and then basically, go through the classical foundations, Greek drama, Plato, Aristotle, that kind of basic foundation for anything else. For younger students, like I said, you want to emphasize physical activity, you want to have them experimenting with things in nature so that they see how the world works for themselves. The kinds of institutions I'm thinking about building anytime soon would all be adult, student bodies. So that's not so relevant. But one day I think it'd be nice to be able to operate as a full-fledged school, or at least a homeschool network. And so it is important to think about how you teach young kids. Self-directed learning is important. For older and younger students, they have to set their own goals and look for the resources to fulfill those goals. And then you can act as an additional resource if they need guidance. A lot of like direct hands-on experimenting is a good thing. Also getting them to teach one another and work in small groups. A lot of the kind of philosophy of education that has been prevalent in alternative institutions like Montessori schools and stuff like that. A lot of that works. Self-directed learning, teaching, encouraging students to teach each other, working in small groups on problems. And for that kind of adult student body, you also want to incorporate the maieutic method, bringing insights out of your students. And that's an integral process that has to do with their psychological state, what's going on with them in terms of their ethical consciousness, as well as like the strictly intellectual stuff they're thinking about. You need that kind of coaching. And that is predicated on a relationship of love in some capacity between the students and between the students and faculty. That's a trust, that's a love, agape, that is a precondition for any kind of institution. Everything else has to be built on goodwill. Because if we don't have goodwill for one another, it doesn't matter what intellectual thing we subscribe to. We can't work together. So you have to have that goodwill. Faculty has to see themselves as being counselors and guides for young souls. It's a kind of sacred obligation and duty they have. So those are just some of my thoughts on philosophy of education. I think it's something that has been neglected in our circles, the education factor. Obviously, that is what we've been doing online to a great extent, is sharing the knowledge that each of us independently acquires. But the thing is, people in that kind of context seek out the information that is a low bar to entry, that's easy to absorb passively, just watching a YouTube video. And the content creators are directing towards an audience that is not necessarily going to be fact-checking them on everything. And so talking points and rhetorical skill wins out in that environment. There are just problems with the way that information flows in current communication platforms that would be overcome if you had an actual institution where people could come together and work on this stuff. So yeah, step one for me is building a platonic-based academy. I think there may actually be a market for that. I think a lot of people are recognizing it's a good thing to get into Platonism, and the best way to learn is kind of by immersion in a context where people are talking about these issues and living according to this ethos consistently. And I think it would offer a lot of value to people. I would like to build it, but I need resources, I need support, I need other people willing to actually show up and do it. So if you're watching this and you think it's a good idea and would like to support, you can contact me about that. If you think, if you have ideas that you want to share with me, suggestions, I would listen to that. You can contact me. If you might want to attend a school like that one day, if you would think about doing that, contact me, let me know what you're looking for in the comments, or you can message me on Skype. I'm just kind of making this video very candid about my intentions, what I think is a good idea going forward, why I've always advocated this school. I think it would be a big benefit to people, and there are a lot of downstream consequences that could be very positive. Artistic collaborations work better in person. things like that. I think the content that would come out of an institution like that would be of a higher caliber than a lot of the stuff that independent content creators make. You know, even if we are black-pilled on the state of things in general, we're expecting some kind of decline, we're witnessing in real time a decline, that doesn't mean all hope is lost. You know, we can build institutions that can survive and thrive during a decline and offer a ray of hope for people, a ray of light. That's what I want to do. That's what I've always wanted to do. It seems like a difficult sell for whatever reason to a lot of people. Maybe because, like, you know, people just don't like school. It seems like a boring topic. They'd rather go out on the streets and march with signs or whatever. But I think, you know, the path to victory is that path of, you know, grinding every day, doing the work every day, showing up to school, doing your reading. You know, like people who LARP at being intellectuals in the Western tradition but haven't read Aristotle, like, you're a joke. You can't be serious. You can't understand the history of Western philosophy if you don't know these foundational texts. So if you want to get a grounding with Aristotle specifically, again, I encourage you, join the Mathematicoi. You can sign up on Patreon or message me. We're starting on the categories tomorrow. So message me about that. If you would like to participate, that's the beginning of his organon, the logical works. And even though Aristotelian logic is not the formal system that's used most often today, people use symbolic logic, it's still absolutely essential if you want to understand the history of Western philosophy in the meantime. All the way up through the scholastics, past the scholastics, modern philosophers still assumed, until the 1800s, Aristotle's logic was just valid. So you have to, even if it's not 100% the best, most, you know, legitimate contemporary logical discipline, you need to know the history of logic to understand the discourse, the history of the discourse. So it should be one of those things that people recognize is like the right thing to do. That's my opinion. I think building the school is the right thing to do. And I don't think ultimately it would be as boring as a lot of people may think. You know, like when I went to basic training, when I was in the Army, I found initially it was very challenging to like discipline myself or be disciplined and be uncomfortable all the time. But pretty quickly, like living according to a schedule, living in a rigorous way, feeling like you are accomplishing things and getting new skills all the time, it's extremely rewarding. So I think it's also just the right way of life. I think that's what many traditions have pointed to, that that monastic life is necessary for a complete society. And the people who want to seek out a better way for themselves need to have guidance, and we need to be willing to look to figures who have kind of tread the path before us. And the only way to facilitate that is in a real life context where you know the people, where you can build mutual trust, where you can have relationships based on love, agape, and not like online grifting and that kind of stuff. So that's the pitch. That's what I wanted to say in this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you guys for listening. God bless.